In this video, I'm going to look at our example code that we just wrote, our main program where we create the two different student objects. I'm going to use the version of the code that's in our notes, and I'm going to draw a picture of what's going on behind the scenes. At this point, if we were to run this program in IntelliJ, it's still not going to look like it does a whole lot because mostly we're reading data and storing it into these objects, but we're not like having them work together or produce output or anything yet. We're going to get there eventually, but for today, we just want to focus on what's going on behind the scenes in memory. So we're running this program and we're storing all this stuff in our main program. I'm a bad drawer, sorry about that. And in there, we're creating all these local variables. So we're storing first name, and then we're storing last name, and we're storing the GPA, and we're storing the credits. So those are our local variables for the main program, and we're reading values into each of those from standard input. So like for first name, we'd read in a value like Sally. And for last name, we'd read in another value like Smith. For the GPA, we'd read in something like she has a 4.0. And for credits, maybe she has 16 credits. So it's just storing information into our local variables. That's like the first thing that happened in our example code in the notes. And then the next thing that happens is we use all of that local data that we've created to create an object of the student type. So we're going to create this new object. We get a pencil thing so that I can draw. Wait. All right, so I'm going to make this new object student type right here. And so that's called student 1 in our program. Student, so bad with the drawing, sorry about this. Student, missing our whiteboard in Trinkle Hall. Student 1, got it. All right, and then inside student 1, I know that I have those 4 different data fields defined. I'm going to use the data field names that are in our notes, which aren't necessarily the ones that I put in my program when I was coding it. But one of the first values was first name. Whoops, spelled right, first name. And then I also had a data field for the student's last name. And then I also had a data field for their GPA, and then finally a data field for their credits. It's like barely gonna fit in my objects, but just use your imagination. Credits earned. So all of those are my data fields that are bundled together in this object. And just creating the student 1 object doesn't store any data in here. It's just making an empty object. And then the data starts to be transferred from these local variables into my student variable when I use the methods of the class. So when I call student1.setFirstName and pass in my local variable fn, it takes the local variable fn, Sally, and assigns that to my first name that's in the class. And it does that because of the code that we included inside that setter method. The set first name method says, take whatever's passed in as an argument and use that to initialize the data field that's part of that class. So same thing, when we call the set last name method and we pass in the value ln, it's taking this ln value Smith and saying, use that to initialize the last name field that's part of my student class. Let's store Smith in there. Then when I call the set GPA method, it's going to take my GPA from my local variable, lowercase GPA, it's 4.0, and it's going to use that to initialize the value of the GPA in my class. And then finally, when I call set credits earned, it's going to take the local value 16 that I pass in as the argument and use that to initialize the value of credits earned that's part of my object. So that'll get stored in there. And it doesn't look like all that data is in there, but imagine my circle's a little bit bigger. And all of that data fits inside that student object. It's all encapsulated together in that class. And then our program creates a second object. I'm going to draw it a little bit bigger this time. See if I can fit all of my data in there. Second object, and it's called student2. Student 2. And inside that object, whenever I instantiate it, when I create that student2 object, I'm going to create those same 4 data fields that are in here, that are in the class. So I'm going to have a first name field, and I'm going to have a last name field, and I'm going to have a GPA field, and a credits earned. Whoops. Credits earned. And again, Java knows to put all of those data fields in there because that's what we set up in our class. When we set those data fields in the class, it tells it, how do I make one of these objects? And then the student2 object, we initialized all the data fields using those setter methods again. This time we were using literal values. So for the first name, we passed in the literal Joe. For the last name, we passed in the literal Jones. For the GPA, we passed in the literal 2.5. And for credits earned, we passed in the value 15. So we used all of those literal information that was passed in as arguments, and it used those to initialize all of the data fields that were part of our class.